The contract termination letter hit Bradford Sinclair's desk at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I watched through the glass wall as the color drained from his face like someone had opened a drain valve. $8.2 million. That's what Pinnacle Manufacturing's annual contract was worth to Apex Commercial Solutions. It was also exactly what Bradford had handed to his son-in-law Trevor 3 weeks earlier, gift-wrapped with my 19 years of relationship building tied up in a bow he didn't earn and couldn't keep. My name's Dalton Pierce. I'm 47 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought loyalty to a company actually meant something. Turns out I was confusing loyalty with stupidity. The difference became crystal clear when Glenn Hartwick, CEO of Pinnacle Manufacturing and the client I'd personally managed for 11 years, didn't just terminate his contract with Apex. He terminated it and signed a new one with me. Personally. My company, the one I'd quietly incorporated exactly 18 days earlier, while Trevor was busy learning how to spell Pinnacle's corporate structure wrong in his introductory emails. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. 3 weeks earlier, in Bradford's corner office with a view of downtown Atlanta, he'd never earned. I joined Apex Commercial Solutions in 2005, right after finishing 5 years in the Navy as a logistics specialist aboard the USS Nimitz. When you're responsible for supply chain coordination on a carrier with 5,000 personnel, you learn something valuable. Relationships aren't built in boardrooms. They're built in the details, the follow-through, the 2 a.m. phone calls when something goes wrong and someone needs to know you'll actually answer. That discipline transferred perfectly to Commercial Solutions Consulting. Apex was a mid-tier firm back then, maybe 40 employees, competing for contracts against companies 5 times our size. My first assignment was Pinnacle Manufacturing. They made industrial components for aerospace and defense contractors. Complex supply chains, strict quality requirements, zero tolerance for delivery failures. Their previous account manager had lasted 6 months before Pinnacle's CEO Glenn Hartwick personally requested a replacement. I got the call on a Friday afternoon. Be at Pinnacle Monday morning, 0700 hours. Don't screw this up. We can't afford to lose them. I showed up at OR 6:30. Glenn was already in his office, reviewing production reports with a coffee that looked like it had been sitting there since yesterday. "You're early," he said, not looking up from the spreadsheet. "Military habit," I replied. "Doesn't go away." His eyes flicked up to meet mine for the first time. Glenn Hartwick was 52 then, built like someone who'd spent time on factory floors instead of golf courses. "Navy?" "Marines," he said. "Marines. Logistics on the Nimitz." Glenn nodded slowly, closing the spreadsheet. "My son served on the Eisenhower. Supply officer. That's when I knew we'd either get along perfectly or hate each other within a month. There's no middle ground with military families in business. We got along perfectly. Over the next 11 years, I built that relationship the way you build anything that lasts. Attention to detail. Reliability. Understanding that when Glenn called at midnight because a critical shipment was delayed and his production line would shut down in 6 hours, I didn't send him to voicemail. I answered, pulled in favors, rerouted logistics, and had that shipment on his dock by 0500, every single time. By year 3, Pinnacle's contract had grown from $1.2 million to $3.8 million annually. By year 7, we were at $6.5 million. By last year, $8.2 million with projected growth to $12 million over the next 2 years. I knew Glenn's daughter had gotten into Georgia Tech's engineering program. I attended his son's military promotion ceremony when he made captain. When his wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, I sent flowers to the hospital and called to check in weekly. Not because it was strategy. Because that's what you do when you actually give a damn about people instead of just seeing them as revenue numbers on a spreadsheet. But here's what I also did. Quietly. Over 19 years. Every major contract I closed, I documented everything. not just the deal terms and deliverables. I documented the relationships, the personal connections, the specific reasons clients chose Apex over competitors. In 2011, when I closed the Hartwell Industries account, worth $4.3 million, I wrote a detailed brief on why CEO Sandra Hartwell selected us. She trusted me personally after I helped her navigate a supplier fraud situation that could have cost her company $2 million. That trust didn't transfer to Apex. It was mine. In 2014, I brought in Consolidated Logistics, $5.1 million annually. CEO Marcus Flynn chose us because I'd worked with him in the Navy, and he knew I'd never let him down operationally. Again, personal relationship, not company brand. By 2018, I was managing 11 major accounts representing $47 million in annual revenue, but none of them were really Apex's clients. They were mine. I just hadn't realized how much that mattered until the day Bradford Sinclair called me into his office and told me I'd be training his son-in-law. My wife Caroline died in 2017. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Diagnosis to funeral in 7 months. Our daughter Sophia was 11 then, trying to understand why mommy wasn't coming home and daddy was working 80-hour weeks, because throwing himself into client relationships was easier than sitting in an empty house where everything reminded him of what he'd lost. I missed Sophia's 12th birthday party because Glenn had an emergency with a supplier bankruptcy and needed me in Cincinnati for crisis negotiations. Missed her school's career day because Bradford insisted I attend a strategy retreat in Charleston that accomplished nothing except wasting 3 days. Missed her first soccer game as team captain because I was on a plane to Seattle managing a contract dispute for Hartwell Industries. By the time Sophia turned 14 last month, I'd missed so many moments that when I asked her what she wanted for her birthday, she said, "I want you to actually be home for dinner, Dad. Not just physically present while checking email. Actually here." That hurt more than I want to admit. But I told myself it was temporary, just until I made senior partner, just until the promotion Bradford kept dangling like a carrot in front of someone too loyal to realize he was never actually planning to give it to me. The promotion meeting happened on a Monday in March. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation showing my client retention rate, 99.2% over 19 years. Revenue growth across my portfolio, 340% since I'd started. Client satisfaction scores that averaged 9.4 out of 10. I had testimonial letters from 8 of my 11 major clients specifically praising my work. Bradford glanced at the presentation for maybe 3 minutes before closing his laptop. "Dalton, you've done solid work here. Nobody's questioning that." I waited for the but. "We've been discussing partnership structure, and the board feels we need to expand our leadership bench with fresh perspectives. Diverse viewpoints. People who can bring modern approaches to client management." I kept my expression neutral, that Navy discipline kicking in when you know bad news is coming but showing emotion would be a tactical mistake. "We've decided to bring in Trevor Whitmore as Senior Vice President of Client Relations. He'll be overseeing your portfolio to learn the ropes before we potentially expand his authority." Trevor Whitmore. Bradford's daughter Melissa's husband. 28 years old with an MBA from Vanderbilt and exactly 0 years of actual client management experience. He'd spent 3 years at a marketing firm writing social media strategy for retail brands. "Where does that leave my partnership track?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "That's something we'll revisit in 12 to 18 months. Right now, we need you to focus on transitioning your client relationships to Trevor. Full knowledge transfer." I nodded once. "When does he start?" "Next Monday. I'd like you to spend this week preparing briefing materials on your top 5 accounts. Start with Pinnacle. That's our largest contract, so it's critical Trevor builds a strong foundation there." I stood up, shook Bradford's hand. and walked out of his office. But instead of going back to my desk, I stopped in the men's room and stared at myself in the mirror for a long minute. 19 years, 47 million in annual revenue that existed because of relationships I'd built. And they wanted me to hand it over to someone's son-in-law so he could pad his resume before inevitably failing upward into an executive role he didn't earn. That's when something shifted. Not anger, not even resentment. Just clarity. Cold, tactical clarity. These clients weren't apexes. They were mine. And if Bradford wanted to play family politics with my life's work, he was about to learn an expensive lesson about the difference between corporate authority and actual leverage. I spent that week doing exactly what Bradford asked. I prepared comprehensive briefing materials on Pinnacle manufacturing. Detailed history of the relationship, organizational structure, key decision makers, contract terms, delivery schedules, pain points, preferences. I even included personal notes about Glenn Hartwick's communication style and the fact that he preferred phone calls to emails for urgent matters. What I didn't include was the real foundation of that relationship, the personal trust built over 11 years, the fact that Glenn's son had called me for career advice when he was considering leaving the Marines. The time I flew to Kansas City at midnight to personally resolve a supplier dispute that could have cost Pinnacle a $15 million contract. The 100 small moments that turn a business relationship into actual friendship. Trevor's first day was a disaster, wrapped in designer confidence. He showed up in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying a leather portfolio that probably had his initials embossed in gold, talking about synergistic value propositions and strategic alignment paradigms. He'd clearly been coached by Bradford or some consultant who'd never actually managed a client relationship in their life. When I introduced him to Pinnacle's account team, Trevor spent 20 minutes explaining his vision for modernizing our service delivery model, using data-driven insights and predictive analytics. Janet, our operations coordinator who'd worked with Pinnacle for 8 years, just stared at him. Finally, she asked, "So what do we do differently?" Trevor blinked several times. "Well, we'll leverage our core competencies to optimize stakeholder engagement across the value chain." Janet looked at me. I kept my expression carefully neutral. "That means he's still figuring it out," I translated quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Trevor try to manage relationships he didn't understand with clients who could smell inexperience like blood in water. He scheduled calls with Glenn Hartwick at 8 a.m. without knowing Glenn never took meetings before 9 a.m. because that's when he reviewed production reports. He sent formal contract amendment proposals for minor issues that I would have resolved with a single phone call. He CC'd 6 people on every email, creating bureaucratic chaos where there used to be efficiency. But I followed my new strategy perfectly. When Janet asked me to fix Trevor's scheduling conflicts, I politely reminded her that Trevor was now the Senior VP of Client Relations and should handle his own calendar coordination. When operations called about a Pinnacle delivery issue that needed immediate resolution, I forwarded the call to Trevor's voicemail with a note that this fell under his portfolio now. When Glenn Hartwick's assistant called my direct line asking why their regular status update call had been moved without consultation, I explained that Trevor was implementing new communication protocols and she should address scheduling concerns with him. I was following protocol exactly as Bradford had outlined. Trevor was in charge, I was support staff, and every client I'd managed for years was slowly realizing that something fundamental had changed. By the end of week 2, Trevor had already made 3 serious mistakes with Pinnacle alone. He'd missed a critical delivery deadline because he didn't understand Pinnacle's production calendar. He'd proposed cost increases without clearing them with Glenn first, causing a tense phone call where Glenn asked if Apex was trying to renegotiate terms mid-contract. And worst of all, he'd referred to Glenn's son's military service incorrectly in an email. calling him a lieutenant when he was actually a captain. Small detail, but to military families, rank matters. Every evening, I came home by 6 p.m. for the first time in years. Sophia noticed immediately. "Dad, why are you home so early?" she asked that first Tuesday, looking up from her homework with genuine surprise. I decided my time was more valuable than I thought, I told her. "Want to grab dinner and catch a movie?" Her face lit up like I'd just told her we were going to Disney World. "Really? You're not going back to work after?" "Not tonight, kiddo. Turns out I've been missing a lot more than I realized." Over dinner at the Italian place she'd been asking to try for months, Sophia told me about school, her soccer team making playoffs, a boy named Marcus who apparently was really annoying but also kind of funny. Normal 14-year-old stuff that I'd been too buried in work to hear about for years. "Dad," she said as we finished dessert, "you seem different. Less stressed, I guess. Like you're actually here when you're here." Smart kid. She'd identified exactly what I was just beginning to understand myself. 3 weeks after Trevor took over my accounts, the situation with Pinnacle reached its breaking point. The Regional Commercial Solutions Conference was happening in Atlanta that Thursday. 3-day event, 500-plus attendees, every major player in our industry. Apex had a booth, Bradford was giving a keynote speech, and Trevor had somehow convinced himself this was his moment to shine. Glenn Hartwick was scheduled to attend. We'd gone to this conference together for the past 7 years. It was part business, part professional networking, part just catching up over bourbon in the hotel bar and talking about industry trends without the pressure of formal meetings. Trevor had other plans. He'd scheduled a formal presentation for Pinnacle, inviting Glenn to a private conference room on the second day to discuss strategic partnership expansion opportunities. He'd prepared a 40-slide PowerPoint deck about leveraging Apex's full-service capabilities to drive operational excellence. He'd even ordered catering, fancy coffee service, the works. I found out about all this from Janet, who called me 3 days before the conference sounding panicked. "Dalton, Trevor scheduled a formal presentation with Glenn Hartwick and didn't tell anyone in operations. We don't have half the capabilities he's promising in his deck. What should I do?" "That's above my authority now," I said calmly. "Trevor's the senior VP. If he's made commitments to clients, he needs to own that relationship." "But Glenn's going to ask technical questions we can't answer," Janet protested. "Trevor doesn't even understand our core service model." "Then he'll learn quickly," I replied. "Sometimes the best education is real-world consequences." The morning of Trevor's big presentation, I was at the conference networking with industry contacts, running into old clients, making new connections, having the kind of conversations that used to be my daily work. Around 10 a.m., I saw Glenn Hartwick walk into the convention center. He spotted me immediately and walked over with that direct stride military guys never lose. "Dalton," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Good to see you. I was hoping we'd have time to catch up this week." "Likewise, Glenn. How's the production expansion going?" "On schedule, mostly. Some supplier issues with the titanium components, but we're managing." He paused, his expression shifting to something more guarded. "I've got a meeting with your new guy in an hour. Trevor something?" "Whitmore," I confirmed. "Trevor Whitmore." Glenn's skepticism was visible. "Yeah, he's been sending me emails with a lot of corporate speak and not much substance. Is he any good, or is this a political appointment?" I chose my words carefully. "Political appointments are above my pay grade, Glenn. But I'll say this. Trevor has an MBA from Vanderbilt and very fresh perspectives on modern client relationship management." Glenn stared at me for 3 seconds. "That's not an answer." "No," I agreed. "It's not." He nodded slowly. understanding passing between us without another word being spoken. That's what 11 years of working together gets you. The ability to communicate honestly without saying anything that could get you fired. "I'll see you at the reception tonight," Glenn asked. "Wouldn't miss it." Trevor's presentation was scheduled for 11 a.m. in conference room 2B. I was not invited, but Janet texted me updates like she was live blogging a disaster. 11:03 a.m. Trevor started 3 minutes late because the laptop wasn't connecting to the projector. 11:15 a.m. He's on slide 12 of 40. Glenn looks like he's checking his watch every 30 seconds. 11:27 a.m. Glenn asked a specific question about our logistics optimization protocols. Trevor said he'd follow up with technical details later. Glenn's jaws clenched. 11:35 a.m. Disaster. Trevor just proposed a 22% price increase to expand services. Glenn stood up and asked if anyone from actual operations was in this meeting. Trevor said he's empowered to handle strategic discussions himself. Glenn said this meeting is over and walked out. I was in the vendor hall when I saw Glenn storm past, his face set in that expression I'd seen exactly twice in 11 years. Both times, someone had just made a catastrophically stupid decision that cost him time or money. He was heading toward the main lobby. I waited about 30 seconds, then followed at a distance. Glenn went straight to the hotel bar, ordered a bourbon, and sat down at a corner table. I gave him 5 minutes, then walked over. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. He looked up, and some of the tension in his face eased. "Please." I sat down and signaled the bartender for a coffee. We sat in silence for maybe a minute before Glenn spoke. 11 years, Dalton. 11 years we've worked together. You've never once walked into my office unprepared. Never missed a deadline that mattered. Never treated me like I was a revenue number on a spreadsheet instead of a partner trying to run a company. I know. Your new guy just pitched me a 22% price increase, offering services you don't currently provide, using language that sounded like he copied it from a business school case study. "Sounds about right," I said quietly. "Is this what Apex has become?" Glenn asked, and there was genuine disappointment in his voice. "Because if it is, I need to know now." I took a long sip of my coffee, choosing my next words very carefully. This was the moment, the decision point that would define everything that came next. "Glenn, can I ask you something off the record?" "Of course." "If you wanted to continue the relationship we've had for 11 years, the one built on trust and actually understanding your business, what would that look like?" He studied me for a long moment. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking a hypothetical question about what level of service and partnership you actually value. Because I think we both know the answer isn't going to be found at Apex anymore." Glenn set down his bourbon glass and leaned forward. "Hypothetically, if someone I trusted was offering to continue that partnership outside of their current corporate structure, I'd be very interested in hearing details. What would you need to see to make that decision?" "A proposal, clean, professional, showing me you've thought this through and aren't just making an emotional decision to leave your company. And probably proof you can actually deliver without Apex's infrastructure behind you." I nodded slowly. That's fair. If someone were to put together that proposal, how much time would they have? "My contract with Apex is up for renewal in 60 days. I've been unhappy with the service direction for the past month, and today's meeting made me question whether I want to continue the relationship at all." 60 days, I repeated. "And if someone approached you with a solid alternative before then I'd consider it seriously." Glenn finished his bourbon. "But Dalton, if we're still being hypothetical here, I'd need to know this person wasn't going to burn bridges and damage their reputation. People remember how you leave a company. I appreciate that. And hypothetically, if someone did this correctly, following all legal and ethical protocols, would you be willing to have a detailed conversation about terms? Glenn stood up and extended his hand. Hypothetically, yes. I shook his hand, and we both knew this conversation had just changed everything. See you at the reception tonight. I'll be there. I didn't go back to the conference that afternoon. I went to the Starbucks 3 blocks away, opened my laptop, and started working on the most important document I'd written in 19 years. Not a proposal, a roadmap. See, here's what Bradford and Trevor and every executive who'd ever undervalued my work didn't understand. I didn't just manage clients. I'd been preparing for this possibility since 2016. That was the year Apex's ownership structure changed and new investors came in talking about operational efficiency and modernization. That's corporate speak for we're going to start making decisions based on spreadsheets instead of relationships, and people like you are expensive. So I'd started keeping insurance. In 2016, I quietly registered Pierce Commercial Solutions LLC. Didn't activate it, didn't market it, just had the legal entity ready in case I ever needed it. In 2018, I got my Series 7 license for securities consultation, expanding my credentials beyond Apex's standard offerings. In 2019, I built relationships with 3 independent logistics firms that could provide operational support without needing a large corporate infrastructure. In 2020, I documented detailed processes for every service Apex provided, writing it all from scratch based on my own knowledge. Not company property, my intellectual capital from 19 years of learning. And in 2022, I quietly secured a $500,000 line of credit through a small business loan, qualified based on my personal track record and assets. Not Apex's financial backing. Mine. All of this was legal, all of it was ethical, and all of it meant that when this moment came, I wasn't starting from zero. I was activating a contingency plan I'd spent 6 years building. By 8 p.m. that evening, I had a complete business proposal ready for Glenn Hartwick. Professional letterhead for Pierce Commercial Solutions. Service offerings that exactly matched what Pinnacle needed, priced at 18% below their current Apex contract, while still leaving me a healthy margin. References from 3 other industry contacts who I'd already called and confirmed would vouch for my work. A detailed transition plan that would cause 0 disruption to Pinnacle's operations, and a letter of intent ready for signature, contingent on me providing proof of business insurance and operational capability within 14 days. Everything Glenn had asked for, delivered in 6 hours. The conference reception was held in the hotel ballroom that evening. 300 people, open bar, networking that would determine business relationships for the next year. I saw Bradford holding court near the bar, Trevor beside him looking like someone who just survived a car accident. Glenn was on the far side of the room talking with several other CEOs from major manufacturing firms. I waited until Glenn was momentarily alone, then walked over. "Enjoy the rest of the conference?" I asked. Glenn turned and actually smiled for the first time that day. "Better than that disaster this morning. How's your hypothetical situation developing?" "Faster than expected. I have something I'd like you to review when you have time." "Not here, obviously. But soon." Glenn pulled out his phone and checked his calendar. "I'm flying back to Kansas City tomorrow night. Have breakfast with me tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. in the hotel restaurant. I'll have what you need to see." He extended his hand again. "Looking forward to it." That night I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, because I was finally doing what I should have done years ago. Taking control of my own career instead of waiting for someone else to decide my value. Breakfast the next morning was exactly what I needed. Glenn reviewed my proposal, asked detailed questions about my operational capabilities, and confirmed he was serious about making a change. By 8:30 a.m., he'd signed the letter of intent. By 9 a.m., he'd emailed his general counsel to begin contract termination proceedings with Apex. And by 9:45 a.m., when Bradford Sinclair opened his email to find the contract termination notice from Pinnacle Manufacturing, the foundation of Trevor's new role had just evaporated. I was back at the conference networking when my phone started buzzing. Text from Janet. Bradford is losing his mind. Wants to know why Pinnacle terminated. Text from Operations Manager Tim. Did you know Pinnacle was canceling? Bradford's calling emergency meetings. Text from Bradford himself. Call me immediately. I turned off my phone and continued my conversations. I wasn't avoiding Bradford. I was prioritizing my time, and right now, introducing myself to potential clients for Pierce Commercial Solutions was a much better use of that time than explaining to my soon-to-be former boss how he'd destroyed an $8.2 million relationship by playing family politics. The emergency meeting happened at 2 p.m. in Conference Room A at Apex's downtown office. Bradford had apparently cut his conference attendance short and demanded every senior staff member return immediately. I showed up at 2:15 p.m., walking into a room full of panicked executives. Trevor sat in the corner, looking like he wanted to disappear into the furniture. Bradford saw me walk in and his face went red. Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for hours. I was at the conference networking with industry contacts, I replied calmly. My phone died. What's the situation? The situation, Bradford said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, is that Pinnacle Manufacturing just terminated an $8.2 million contract with 30 days' notice. No explanation, no warning. Just termination effective immediately. That's unfortunate, I said, sitting down at the conference table. Does their termination notice cite specific cause? No specific cause, the general counsel said, flipping through documents. Just standard contract language about dissolution of business relationship by mutual agreement. Except there's nothing mutual about this. Glenn Hartwick called our main line this morning and said he's done with Apex, effective in 30 days. Bradford turned to Trevor. What happened in your meeting with him yesterday? Trevor's voice was shaky. I presented the strategic partnership expansion proposal. Outlined growth opportunities, value-added services, comprehensive approach to long-term relationship building. And, Bradford demanded. He walked out halfway through, said the meeting was over and he had other commitments. You didn't think to mention that yesterday. Bradford's voice was getting louder. I thought he just needed time to process the information, Trevor stammered. That's how high-level negotiations work. You let the proposal sit so they can evaluate it strategically. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was watching Trevor's inexperience destroy him in real time. This wasn't high-level negotiations. This was a 28-year-old MBA who just lost an $8.2 million account and didn't even understand why. Bradford turned to me. Dalton, you managed Pinnacle for 11 years. What the hell happened? I considered my response carefully. Glenn Hartwick is a former Marine who values direct communication, reliability, and relationships built on trust rather than corporate speak. He doesn't respond well to formal presentations full of strategic paradigms and synergistic value propositions. He wants someone who understands his business and will answer the phone at 2 a.m. when there's a crisis. Can you fix this? Bradford asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Can you call Glenn and salvage the relationship? I don't think that's appropriate, I said. Trevor is the Senior VP of Client Relations. This is his portfolio to manage now. I'm just support staff, remember? The silence in that conference room was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Bradford stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Dalton," Bradford said slowly, "if this is about the partnership decision, we can revisit that conversation. But right now, I need you to do whatever it takes to keep Pinnacle." "I appreciate the offer," I replied. "But I don't think I'm the right person to fix this situation anymore. You wanted fresh perspectives and modern approaches. Trevor's your guy for that. Maybe he just needs more time to build rapport with Glenn." "We don't have time," Bradford said flatly. "Pinnacle represents 17% of our annual revenue. If we lose them, we're going to miss our quarterly targets, our board is going to ask serious questions, and our growth projections for next year are completely destroyed." "I understand that's a difficult position," I said. "But I'm not sure what you expect me to do at this point." "I expect you to do your job," Bradford snapped. "You're still an employee of this company. Your job is to protect our client relationships, not to let them walk away because your ego is bruised." "My ego isn't bruised, Bradford. I'm just following the chain of command you established. Trevor is Senior VP. He should handle this." That's when the General Counsel spoke up, her voice careful. "Dalton, has Glenn Hartwick contacted you personally about this situation?" "No," I said. That was technically true. Glenn had contacted me about a hypothetical situation, not specifically about terminating his Apex contract. Bradford looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out if I was lying. He couldn't tell. That Navy poker face was serving me well. "Fine," Bradford finally said. "Trevor, you're going to call Glenn Hartwick this afternoon and try to salvage this. Dalton, you're going to coach him through that conversation and provide any background context he needs. And if we can't resolve this by end of week, we're all going to be having very uncomfortable conversations about who's responsible for losing our second largest account." As the meeting broke up, Trevor approached me looking desperate. "Dalton, I need help here. I don't know what I did wrong." Glenn seemed engaged during the first part of the presentation. "You proposed a 22% price increase without clearing it with him first," I said quietly. "You offered services we don't currently provide, and you treated him like a generic corporate client instead of a partner you've worked with for over a decade." "But Bradford said fresh approaches," Trevor protested. "Modern client management strategies. Bradford doesn't understand that Glenn Hartwick doesn't care about your MBA or your modern strategies. He cares about competence, reliability, and trust, and you haven't earned any of those yet." "Can you help me fix it?" Trevor asked. I thought about that question for exactly 3 seconds. Then I thought about 19 years of loyalty to a company that had just handed my life's work to someone's son-in-law. Thought about every missed dinner with Sophia, every weekend I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made believing it would matter. "No," I said, "I don't think I can." That afternoon, I submitted my resignation to Apex Commercial Solutions. Effective immediately. No 2 weeks' notice, no transition period. Just a 1-paragraph letter citing personal career development and thanking them for the opportunity. Bradford called me within 10 minutes of receiving my resignation email. His voice was tense, controlled. "Dalton, let's not be hasty here. If this is about compensation or title, we can negotiate." "It's not about compensation," I said. "It's about recognizing that my time is more valuable than you've been treating it. Come on, we've worked together for 19 years. Don't throw that away over one decision. You're right, we have worked together for 19 years. And in those 19 years, I built relationships, brought in accounts, and generated revenue that kept this company competitive. Then you gave my portfolio to your son-in-law because family politics mattered more than competence. That's not throwing away 19 years. That's recognizing when it's time to leave." Bradford's tone shifted. "If you think you can take our clients with you, you're wrong. We have non-compete agreements, Dalton. Non-solicitation clauses that prevent you from contacting any Apex client for 18 months after termination. Actually, I replied, I reviewed my employment contract very carefully last night. The non-compete clause restricts me from soliciting Apex clients. It says nothing about clients who voluntarily seek out my services after I've left the company. That's a distinction without a difference, Bradford said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Not according to Georgia employment law, I said. If a client independently decides to terminate their relationship with Apex and then chooses to hire me afterward, that's not solicitation. That's their business decision. You consulted with Glenn Hartwick behind our backs, Bradford accused. I had a hypothetical conversation with a long-time professional contact about industry trends and business possibilities. That's called networking, Bradford. You should try it sometime. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, we'll see what our lawyers have to say about this. You do that, I said. And while you're talking to lawyers, maybe have them explain the difference between a non-compete violation and a client making an independent business decision. I hung up before he could respond. 2 days later, Pierce Commercial Solutions officially opened for business. I rented a small office in Midtown Atlanta, hired Janet as my operations coordinator. She quit Apex the same day I did and activated all those contingency plans I'd been building for 6 years. My first signed client was Pinnacle Manufacturing. $8.2 million contract, exactly the same scope of services they'd had with Apex, priced at 18% less. Glenn's contract with Apex terminated on day 30. His contract with Pierce Commercial Solutions began on day 31, perfectly legal, perfectly clean, and absolutely devastating to Apex's quarterly revenue. But that was just the beginning. See, what Bradford didn't understand was that clients don't have loyalty to companies. They have loyalty to people. And I'd built relationships with 10 other major accounts over 19 years. Within 2 weeks of opening Pierce Commercial Solutions, I received calls from 4 other clients I'd managed at Apex. Not because I'd solicited them, because they'd heard through industry networks that I'd left, and they wanted to know if I was available to work with them independently. Hartwell Industries called first. Sandra Hartwell, the CEO who I'd helped through that supplier fraud situation in 2011. Dalton, I heard you left Apex. Is it true? It is, Sandra. Started my own firm. Interesting, because I've been unhappy with Apex's service quality for the past year. Ever since they reorganized and I started working with new account managers who don't understand our business. What would it take to bring my account over to Pierce Commercial Solutions? 2 weeks later, Hartwell Industries terminated their $4.3 million Apex contract and signed with me. Consolidated Logistics called next. Marcus Flynn, the CEO I'd worked with in the Navy. Similar conversation, similar outcome. $5.1 million contract moved from Apex to Pierce Commercial Solutions. By the end of my second month in business, I'd signed 7 former Apex clients, representing $31.4 million in annual revenue. All of them had terminated their Apex relationships first, then approached me independently. All perfectly legal, and all completely destroying Apex's financial projections for the year. The industry trade publication ran an article in month 3 titled, "Exodus at Apex, 7 Major Clients Follow Veteran Account Manager to New Firm." The article detailed how Bradford Sinclair's decision to promote his son-in-law over a 19-year veteran had triggered a mass client departure that would cost Apex an estimated $31 million in annual revenue and potentially lead to layoffs and restructuring. The article quoted Glenn Hartwick directly. "Business is built on relationships and trust, not corporate politics. When companies forget that, they pay the price." Bradford called me one more time after that article published. His voice had lost all its earlier authority. "Dalton, You've made your point. You've proven you can take clients. Now can we talk about resolving this professionally? There's nothing to resolve, Bradford. I left your company, and clients independently chose to work with me. That's how the market works. You destroyed us, he said quietly. I didn't destroy anything. I built relationships for 19 years that you thought belonged to Apex. Turns out they belong to me. You just never bothered to understand the difference. What do you want from me? He asked, and there was genuine defeat in his voice. Nothing. I don't want anything from you. Then why are you doing this? Because you needed to learn that loyalty is a two-way street, that competence matters more than credentials. And that when you hand someone's life work to your son-in-law because of family politics, you shouldn't be surprised when they take that life work somewhere else. The final piece of karma came 6 months after I'd left Apex. The board, facing massive revenue losses and client departures, removed Bradford Sinclair as CEO and brought in an outside executive to restructure the company. Trevor Whitmore was let go as part of the restructuring, his 10-month tenure as Senior VP of Client Relations ending with exactly 0 successfully managed accounts on his record. The trade publications covered it as a cautionary tale about nepotism in corporate leadership. But the real victory wasn't seeing Bradford and Trevor face consequences. The real victory was much simpler than that. One evening, about 8 months after starting Pierce Commercial Solutions, I was home by 5:30 p.m. Sophia was at the kitchen table working on her geometry homework, and I actually had the mental energy to help her through the problems instead of being buried in work stress. When we finished, she looked up at me and said, "Dad, you know what's different now?" "What's that, kiddo?" "You're actually happy. Like really happy. Not just pretending." I thought about that for a moment. You're right. I am happy. Because you're not working as much. Because I'm doing work that matters, with people who value what I bring to the table, and because I'm not missing your life anymore. She smiled, that bright 14-year-old smile that made every sacrifice worth it. Good. Because you're a lot better dad when you're actually here. Smart kid. She understood what had taken me 19 years to figure out. Your value doesn't disappear just because someone fails to recognize it. It just means you need to take that value somewhere it's actually appreciated. Pierce Commercial Solutions ended its first year with 12 clients, $43 million in annual revenue, and a profit margin that let me hire 4 full-time staff and give them all the kind of work-life balance I'd never had at Apex. We're not trying to be the biggest firm in Atlanta. We're trying to be the best, the kind of company where relationships matter more than corporate politics, where competence gets rewarded over credentials, and where loyalty actually means something because it goes both ways. Glenn Hartwick sent me a bottle of bourbon for Christmas with a note that said, "To 12 years of partnership and counting. Thanks for remembering that business is built on trust." Sophia made the honor roll that semester, and I was there for the awards ceremony to watch her get recognized. She played in the soccer championship, and I was in the stands cheering. She had her 15th birthday party, and I was actually present for the entire thing, not checking my phone every 5 minutes for work emergencies. These are the victories that matter. Not revenge, not destroying your former employer, just building something better and being present for the people who actually matter in your life. If you've ever been undervalued at work despite bringing real competence and proven results, remember this. Your relationships, your expertise, your reputation, those belong to you, not your employer. When companies choose politics over performance, they're not destroying your career. They're just revealing that it's time to take your value somewhere it's actually recognized. Sometimes the best response to being overlooked isn't anger or revenge. It's demonstrating your worth so clearly that clients follow you, Competitors respect you, and your former employer learns an expensive lesson about the difference between corporate authority and actual leverage. The math is simple. Loyalty without recognition is just exploitation. Competence without opportunity is just wasted potential. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop making other people's blindness your problem and start building something that's actually yours. Drop a comment if you've ever had to make the hard choice between loyalty and self-respect. Subscribe if you want more stories about what really happens when corporate politics crashes into real competence. Because trust me, in today's business world, this story plays out more often than anyone wants to admit. The only question is whether you're brave enough to recognize your own value before someone else decides it for you.